When they let you down, it's going to be really easy to resent that sacrifice. If it's an offering to the Lord, it's worship. And by the way, he's no man's debtor. And he who refreshes others, the Bible says, will himself be refreshed. Hello and welcome to the Next Gen podcast. If this is the first time that you are tuning in, my name's Annaliese. If you've never heard one of our H&A Q&As before, it is such a pleasure to be with you here by myself today. My husband Harry and I are pastors in Brisbane, Australia, and today you've caught me on a very rare, rainy Queensland day. We are originally from New Zealand, as you can probably hear with my accent, but together, my husband and I, we are passionate about the next generation. We're passionate about Next Generation Ministries, and we are passionate about empowering next generation ministers to be the best that they can be. So I want to give a special shout out before we get started to our Next Gen Nation. We've got some emails and some great content coming your way in the next wee while. Thank you so much for bearing with us as we've gotten this whole move underway. Harry right now is looking after our son. So it's a bit of a juggle. Son, new place, all the good stuff. So we're having a great time here, and we're going to be having a great time here today on the podcast. So today we are talking about lessons for the volunteer pastor. So while this content is aimed primarily at those of us who aren't on the payroll, those principles that I'm about to share, these principles are relatively transferable. So if you are in paid ministry, still worth a listen, stick around, don't throw the podcast away quite yet. Whether you're technically called a pastor in a volunteer ministry, you might be a youth director or a kids team leader or that young adults dude, whatever your title, if you run a ministry in an unpaid position, I think you are a true hero. It's easy to think, though, that all your problems would be solved if you just had a salary. Now, I have been on both sides, unpaid and paid, and both situations have their privileges, their pros, and their cons. One such privilege of an unpaid leader is the lessened expectation of your outputs. No one expects you to do it all. No one expects you to be everywhere, talk to everybody, have everything going on because you have other things going on in your life. That's definitely something that those of you in paid roles may feel as a pressure from your pastor, from the congregation, wherever it's coming from. In that unpaid position, I think it's very important that you remember that there are definitely some pros as well. My background in the paid versus unpaid, obviously I've done a few years in paid ministry. I've done a number of years in unpaid ministry. I lived in Dunedin, New Zealand. We were part of a location launch, which was basically, it felt like a bare bones launch. And there was no space at all, even though the church grew really quickly, to bring people on staff. And so I was studying, working, I was serving, I was running youth, worship, a bunch of other things. And it was all voluntary. And I had quite intense level of expectation that probably I put on myself, but also felt that other people had put on me because I was one of the key leaders in the church. And again, there were pros, there were cons, and it was probably one of the most growing and stretching seasons of my life. So I have learned a lot in that time, and I want to share some of those insights with you today on our podcast, because I do think that a lot of our next generation ministries, especially young adults and kids, do tend to be voluntary roles. And by the way, just think you're amazing if that is you. So that is it. I'm back in that space right now in the volunteer capacity. So it's a joy. And if you're with me in that, welcome to the club. There are 3 lessons today that I have to share with you. Lessons I've learned and lessons that I hope bless you as well. Number 1, keep your spirit sweet. There is nothing worse than a resentful servant, in inverted commas. Your people are going to feel your resentment. You may not have started resentful, but if you don't keep your spirit sweet, if you don't keep your spirit in check, your people are definitely going to feel it. One way to achieve this is to make sure that what you do is unto the Lord. Don't do it for your pastor. Don't do it out of a sense of obligation. Don't even do it for the people that you care about. Now, obviously, you should care about the people you're ministering to. You should care about your community and that next generation if you're in this role, but don't do it for them because they're going to let you down. They're going to disappoint you. They're not going to give you the thanks that you feel that you deserve. If you are doing the role unto the Lord, Our God who never lets us down, by the way, he will sustain you. But if you are doing it unto people or unto your pastor, they are not going to give you what you need in order to see it through for the long term. When they let you down, it's going to be really easy to resent that sacrifice. If it's an offering to the Lord, it's worship. And by the way, he's no man's debtor. And he who refreshes others, the Bible says, will himself be refreshed. So make sure that you're regularly coming back to your why. Come back to the fact that you are building God's kingdom, that you are serving your master, Jesus. Keep a grateful heart and a sweet spirit. Psalm 139 at the very end says, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts." And that's something that I pray often. God, search my heart. Because the Bible also says the heart is deceitful above all things. So, Lord, reveal to me if I need to keep things in check, if I need to change up my attitude. Search me. And the Bible says, see if there's an offensive way in me and lead me to the path of understanding. Lesson number 1, keep your spirit sweet. Lesson number 2, predetermine and communicate boundary lines. Now, I want to be really careful as I open up the conversation for this one, because I think it's very in vogue at the moment to be over interested in rest. People have taken it to the extreme. Now, if you're a volunteer leader of a ministry, I think it's unlikely that this is a problem for you, but it is a risk that I do see, and a theme that I do see coming through at the moment, is that people are over obsessed with rest and are unwilling to make the sacrifices required to build God's house. So when I say predetermine and communicate boundary lines, I'm not saying keep your boundary lines small. I'm not saying I'm only going to do 1 hour here and 1 hour there, and that's all I'm going to give, and you can't talk to me outside of those hours. That's not what I'm saying at all. But it is important to have boundary lines. If you want to do this long term, you need to create safe margins around what you are doing. What have I committed to? That's one boundary that could be worthwhile. Be on the same page as your pastor. Make sure that they understand and you understand what you have committed to. Because if you're not on the same page, either you'll run into what feels like unfair expectations from them, or you'll be doing so much more than they ever wanted for you or expected from you, and you can become overwhelmed and resentful towards them for behavior that you decided to do. So make sure that you're on the same page as your pastor, as your leader, with what your commitment actually entails. A second boundary that's really good to consider is, when are you available for your young people? Pastoring is a lifestyle. Hear me and understand. I know that you know that it's not a 9-to-5 job. For you, a volunteer, it's definitely not going to be 9 to 5. You're probably doing work between 9 to 5. But it is a lifestyle that you still need to create boundaries around. You still need to put boundary lines in place. And unfortunately for me, I had to learn this the hard way. Once I learned this lesson of actually, you know what, it is important to draw some lines in the sand to say, hey, you know what? I turn my phone off at 10 p.m. If you want to call me, text me after that, I'm probably not going to reply until the morning. Now, that's actually a healthy boundary to put in place. And especially if you're working with young people who like to doom scroll in the middle of the night and start getting anxious in their thoughts, they want to reach out to you. It's actually not a healthy way to engage with your young people, to be texting them at 2:00 in the morning. So if that's a boundary you need to put in place, you know what? You teach young people how to engage with you. So, hey, I turn my phone off at 10 p.m. If there's a disaster that's going on in your world, here's an emergency number you can call. Because you know what? If there's a disaster going on in your world at 2 a.m., there's not going to be much that I'm going to be able to do anyway. So I'll reply at 7:00 when I wake up in the morning. Creating boundary lines around those kinds of things is going to mean that your life is a lot more doable. There's a lot more enjoyable. Perhaps your boundary will be, we do family stuff on Saturday. So I'm not going to go and hang out with youthies on a Saturday. It might mean that I stay a bit later at youth on a Friday night to catch up with this crew. But because Saturday is a family day, I'm going to prioritize my family. Now, with these boundaries, I want to also encourage you, don't be so rigid with them that you lose your heart for what you're doing. Because if Saturday is my family day and I'm never, ever, ever going to do anything on Saturday for my family day, what happens when one of your leaders is getting married on a Saturday and you're like, nope, family day is Saturday? That's not your heart. That's not who you want to be. So make sure that there is a little bit of bending and flexing. But by putting the boundary in place, you are communicating it. you have a healthy ability to look at people who are asking things of you and say, hey, look, I'll get back to you in a day or two. I'll reply to that call later. So first of all, keep your spirit sweet. Second of all, predetermine and communicate boundary lines. And lastly, make peace with the truth that you can't do it all. I said it at the beginning. It's a pro of the role that you have as a volunteer. And again, by the way, if you're in paid ministry, you also can't do it all. But if you are in volunteer ministry, you have to make peace with the truth that you cannot do it all. I know it's easy to want to be impressive, to juggle the job, the course, to run the ministry. But I just want to remind you right now that nobody expects you to do it all. Not your pastor, not your people. God does not expect you to do it all. So make sure that you work within your context. If you have 4 hours a week to pull off the kids ministry, don't expect from yourself a masterpiece every Sunday morning. You're pulling something off in 4 hours. So remember to put yourself in your own context. A couple of key tips around if you've got a small capacity, you don't have much time, make sure you're mobilizing your team. See, if you've got 4 hours, I would encourage you to spend a good chunk of that time investing in your team. They're probably volunteers too. But if they are invested in, and if you can invest in them, they can multiply the work that you are doing in that ministry. The second thing I'd encourage you to do is not to spend all of your limited time on program. It's really easy, especially in kids ministry or if you're running a youth on a Friday night or something, to spend all of your energy, whatever is left from you, focusing on making that program awesome. Now, of course, you want an awesome program, but look, like I say, outsource some of that. It's more important as the pastor or leader of the ministry that you are raising leaders, that you are with the people, that you are spending time seeking God for this ministry, praying for your people, than that you have an amazing program. Because if you are just focusing on program, it stops being a ministry and it starts being a program, which I know is not your heart. It's certainly not our heart. And so I want to encourage you, remember that you can't do it all. Make sure you're prioritizing some of these really important things: investment in people, pastoring people, raising leaders. You can't do it all, and that's okay. So there you have it. It's short and sweet today. I hope that you are blessed. I hope that you're encouraged. None of this is revolutionary, but maybe there's a little bit in there. I know Harry says maybe our thing is your one thing. I'm not exactly sure what it is that he says. Should have written it down. But I do hope that there was some little nugget that you could have taken away from today. I do just want to bless you and thank you for what you are doing as you build your ministries and build God's kingdom. Remember, you're doing it unto the Lord. Keep your spirit sweet. Predetermine your boundary lines, communicate them, and make peace with the truth that you can't do it all. See, the reality is we want you to love this thing in 3 years' time, if that's what God is still calling you to do. Let's be people of longevity. Let's keep that spirit sweet. Let's make sure that everything we do is unto the Lord. That's it for now. Hey, every Next Gen leader, be encouraged. Your story is changing history, leading the legacy and changing the tide. So don't quit. Keep the grip. And I'll see you very soon on the Next Gen podcast. I wrote that one down.